Those of you who have been before know how this works. We have a panel of interesting people who we will briefly introduce to you for anybody who doesn't know who we are. Basically, you may ask anything from the floor. You may say anything from the floor about anything, really. But obviously, the kind of thing we usually talk about is probably beneficial. Try not to hog the microphone for too long if it does come your way. If you want to speak, lift your hand, and either Sheila or I will come and hand you the microphone. Try and talk into the microphone and say whatever interesting things you have to say or questions that we can debate and enlighten everybody with, or not, as the case may be. So, let's introduce the panel. Well, I'll start as I'm yakking. This is Mr. Rod Bearcloud, known to many of you. Rod has spoken many times at the Glastonbury Symposium. He is a researcher respected around the world, and many of you will have seen his astonishing computer graphics rendering some of the crop circles into incredible three-dimensional shapes and colours, and using Native American wisdom to work out what it all means. So, Mr. Rod Bearcloud. Sheila.
And next we have for you Mr. Peter Taylor, who was with us this afternoon. And of course, for most of you who were there, he is an environmentalist. And he is also does a lot of shamanic work. And I think what we found out this afternoon was how necessary that the blend of science and shamanism or understanding of otherworldly things are for current development of scientific understanding. So we're very glad to have him back, because people were a bit cross with me this afternoon for pulling him off. Yeah. So please welcome Peter Taylor.
And next we have the gentleman who you saw this afternoon, Mr. Richard Smith, who is the fashion guru, I think, of the day. Give us a twirl. It's fantastic stuff. There he is. Yeah, give him a clap. Mr. Richard Smith. And Richard has been into lenses, as you heard earlier, and maybe we didn't say earlier, but we'll say it now. For many years, was a kingpin of the East Midlands Crop Circle group, and did a lot of work up there with Anne Brocklehurst, who should have been with us, but Anne's decided to take a rest at the back there. But give them both a clap anyway. Give Anne a clap, who would have been up with us.
Now, next, we welcome a very dear friend of the Symposium. He's been involved for years and years and years, and for many years he was also present in the stalls room, and then decided to take a couple of years off. Well, it was awful, wasn't it? So we're really glad that he's back there this weekend. And he's the editor of Nexus magazine. He's going to be talking to us tomorrow morning. He's an expert on hidden history, and because he's the editor of Nexus magazine, he knows lots and lots of things about conspiracies and medicine and all sorts of things. So please welcome Mr. Marcus Allen.
And, of course, we have Dr. Jude Currivan, who you saw only but a few couple of hours ago. And thank you very much for that earlier on. Consciousness, the wave, all of this stuff, these are her wares. And thank you for your knowledge earlier on. So, Dr. Jude Currivan.
The rose between four thorns.
Something like that, yeah. Yes. Yes, it's very male energy, isn't it? It would have been an extra female bit, but there we are. I'm sure, Jude, you'll cope, won't you? Somehow. Yes. Okay, well, look, let's begin by introducing individually each member of the audience. No, all right. No. Okay, well, who would like to start? Throw in anything you want. Let's have a hand.
Typical, right at the back of the hall.
Right, okay. Which one, Bucket? Oh, right, well... It's very, very right that it should be Anne who starts this. So here we are. Anne, who should have been up there.
Yeah. Thank you. In view of parallel community, I was wondering what the group think of the word politics.
Ooh. Right, any one of you may start.
Is this on?
Oh, 1 second. It should be on.
Is it on? Okay.
It is on.
Okay.
Hello, hello, hello.
Okay. Shall I start?
Hello, hello.
No, that doesn't go.
It feels to me that there's two sorts of politics. There's the politics with a big P and there's politics with a little p. And the politics with a big P is the professional organisations that we're all used to. But I actually feel that the politics with a big P is generally people who have decided to do that for a way of life, and in the main, not all, but in the main are tied to current institutions, current ways of perhaps looking at the world. I actually feel that every single one of us at a grassroots level can take part in politics, small p. And I feel that at the moment we have choices to make. We can either take a step back from the world and merely witness what's going on, or we can take a step forward to be part of it. And as my ex-husband said, with no judgment, but man who sits on mountain gets bugger all done, I guess my own sense is to take part, to participate in envisaging a new world, a world of diversity, but a world where that diversity is underpinned by the unity that joins us all. So I think politics with a small p is something that is part of all of us, and all of us can take part in. And I always remember something that Anita Roddick once said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, then share a sleeping bag with a mosquito.
I'm with Groucho Marx on the definition of politics. Politics is the art of finding a problem where none exists, diagnosing it incorrectly, and then providing the wrong answer. That's politics with a big P.
If I could furnish a small definition on the subject, I think if politics actually forms one of the basic tenets of philosophy, and it actually means ideal social organisation. That's the bottom line. That's what politics means. And when it gets passed into the hands of elitist people who then tend to corrupt it and call themselves our representatives when in fact they elect themselves to be our rulers, then it all goes a bit wrong. So actually, to answer the question, politics is ideal social organisation. Now, the ideal is the tough part.
Yes, in my ways, it's a word that we don't really use, politics, and so we have a tendency to stay away from that. We see everybody as one and as equal, and everyone has a part in making the nation a greater place and taking their own way to a higher order. So we like to think that everybody spins the same circle in an equal way. Oh. Yes, we are.
Well, I as a scientist, I've been kind of involved in the policy process. So that's where all politics eventually leads to. So politicians are only a small part of that. There are lots of other interest groups that feed in different ways till eventually you get a decision that affects everybody. And what I've noticed is that there's the politics that you see on the surface. And then there's the politics that you don't see, how the different interest groups operate and how they feed in and where they feed in and who has lunch with whom, where the judiciary fit into the process, where the police commissioners, the military, the big business people, the media barons, and so forth. So I've kept a wary eye on politicians, and I know when Tony Blair was elected, I thought, things will change. And then he visited Italy to have a holiday and hugged a certain Silvio Berlusconi, who at that time was Prime Minister of Italy. I thought, he's on hugging terms with Silvio Berlusconi. And if you just looked at Silvio Berlusconi on a political level, you would see that he was the Prime Minister and he had a party and he'd got into politics about 5 years earlier, formed a party and had suddenly got to be Prime Minister. But if you went back 10 years to the time that the Masonic Lodge P2 in Rome was bust open, and in which the whole power structure of a Western state operated in secret in 1982, Silvio Berlusconi was a key member of that. And his membership was based on the fact that he was a billionaire and controlled a media empire in Italy. And so the media people had sat down with representatives of the Vatican Bank, who were siphoning $1 billion to finance South American regimes, right-wing regimes. And you had the military, the police, the navy, everybody there. The head at the table was a nobody. He was a Kabbalist magician, Licio Galli. But around the table as well, the new boys on the block were essentially the mafia. And it was important for me to know this at the time because the mafia controlled the toxic waste trade. Goodness knows why, but they also control trafficking of women, drugs. Well, you know the story. And that's big business too, and that's why they have a seat at the table. So it's these hidden tables where the key decisions are made, which are hidden from the political process. As probably you all know this anyway. But that is the kind of underground that goes on, kind of Plutonian underground. And this is where kind of shamanic techniques come in a little bit more than the political, because you have no inroad to that through normal political representation. The only way is to dream in. And of course, they, particularly the head of the table, who's a magician, they're also dreaming. They're dreaming the new American century. They're dreaming the answer to the future, which is wars and military and globalization and control. So this is, to me, the political process. And it's like, well, what do we do? And I've kind of dropped out of politics a little bit because of that and gone more into the man in the mountain and the heart and the energy and holding the spirit together. That's what I think we have to do through music, through dance, through creativity. Because we're faced with something that's thousands of years old, empires and slavery, economic slavery now. And the response to that is, you know, almost politics is almost a distraction from that.
Okay, we have a question from down the
Can
front.
I respond to that?
Oh, okay, sorry, Jude.
I'd like to respond to that. I agree with all that you've said, but I still believe that we can make a huge difference, and I think we make a huge difference by feeling what's in our hearts and what our hearts call us to. And when I said the difference between big P politics and little p politics, that's what I was meaning. It wasn't the conspiracies and the institutions and the organisations. It was actually the small p that is what our hearts call us to. And that may be that we sit and we witness and we hold the space. It may be that we shamanically dream. It may be that we become activists at whatever grassroots way our hearts call us to. But I would describe that as politics with a small p that is our birthright and our responsibility.
Okay, we'll take a question now.
I actually have a brief comment to make about the word politics. And I have an intuitive reading of language. And the word, when I look at the word politics, I see in the beginning P-O-L, like pole or polarity. And then I see the word tick at the end, like a clock, ticking back and forth. And so I must say that I related to Rod Bearcloud's answer in the sense that politics often is that. It's a separating method of governing by looking at the enemy and the other, and the Republicans and the Democrats, where I'm from the States. It's a very polarized way of governing, and in a way hypnotizes the populace. Therefore, I have a vision of a higher order of governing that doesn't use the word politics, something other, leadership of some sort, somebody who has true vision.
Anybody from this side? Yes, here we are.
I'm sure some of you have heard of the Disclosure Project. The Disclosure Project? It's basically a group of people who believe that aliens have actually been to our planet and who have actually, or we have gained technology from them, and they believe that there are upper levels of the government who are withholding that information from us. One of the things they show on their website is a crop circle which was supposedly created by these aliens, which is the images that were sent on Voyager. Do you have any thoughts on the Disclosure Project and whether this is true or if it's just the biggest hoax on the planet? Thanks.
Okay. Rod, off you go. Okay, sales pitch coming up now, chaps. Thank you for asking. It wasn't a planted question, but those of you who will have received your copies of Nexus because you're good subscribers this morning may not have had a chance to read the article in the current edition of Nexus by Stephen Greer discussing precisely this point. Stephen Greer is the prime mover behind the Disclosure Project. What was it? Disclosure. That's it. Get it right, guys. The prime mover. And he actually spoke at the Symposium here, I think, in 2001, where he introduced it. He's been over here several times. He's been involved with crop circles. But the point he makes in the article in Nexus, August-September issue, volume 14, number 5, available on the Nexus stand at the back, end of commercial, discusses precisely that point, that he has had a lot of interviews. He's spoken to a lot of very high-ranking military, political, industrial figures, primarily within the American government, the American military-industrial complex, let's call it, famous phrase introduced by President Eisenhower in his closing speech in 1960, where these guys who he's interviewed and has had interviewed in public at the press club in Washington, D.C., claim precisely this, that sections of the American industrial complex have had access to this technology. Now, one might say, well, this is great news. Fantastic. Why haven't we seen it? If we haven't seen it, and it's been around since Roswell, 1947, 60 years, well, it must be a hoax, and they're imagining it. What are they on? Let's have some of the same. This is the general attitude. I believe that many people in this room will not have that attitude and may well be prepared to consider the evidence as presented, which is very powerful. And without trying to usurp Stephen Greer's conclusions, his point is precisely that yes, this technology has been available, but it has been withheld for very specific reasons, not least the obvious ones, like, well, how are the oil companies going to make any money if they can't sell their products? This is the rather puerile attitude. This is the attitude which has been promoted in the press, promoted throughout industry and throughout politics, if you like. Now, aside from that, there are many presidents, Clinton being one of them, Carter being another, Nixon, who are not in the loop. Certainly prime ministers, presidents in Europe are not in the loop. Heads of intelligence agencies are not in the loop. So when they say we have no evidence for the existence of UFOs, etc., they're telling the truth. They don't. They're out of the loop. These people are kept out of the loop because it's not their business to know. The technology is being kept secret. It is being withheld for very powerful political reasons, not least of which would be the world political balance. Currently, America has the biggest army, they've got the biggest guns, they control things, they like to think. If technology is available whereby everybody from China, India, Brazil, Russia, Japan, the Philippines, any of the major countries in the world would have access equally to a technology which allows energy production of unlimited amounts at no cost, the political balance in the world changes overnight, and that That is why the technology is withheld. It is a very powerful piece. It is worth reading if you want to get up to speed on exactly what is happening. Thank you.
One of my nation's names is Anishinaabe. It's a word that means people who fell from the sky, or relatives and where we came from, so that we might have visitors of such thing at this day and time is not out of the loop of things for us and not too foreign. So there's that side of it as well. But that there's confusion that runs through my thoughts when I imagine our governments and places of power sending symbols of harmony and balance and higher consciousness to the earth to help the people. It's just kind of out of my realms of thought, so I have a hard time with that. And I think a great number of people can see those qualities about these symbols. In fact, this huge one that appeared in Eastfield the other day, I think the majority of the people saw that as an Om symbol, did they not? So so when we get into this thing about the government, I have a struggle with some of that. So where's Stalo? Oh.
I have absolutely no problem with thinking that it's very possible that the controlling the balance of power Western democracies actually have a vested interest in making sure we don't actually get to the truth of this. Pretty easy, really. The balance of power of politics has been going on since the Victorian age, when Bismarck and his cronies basically divvied up Europe and said, okay, well, this is your problem, this is mine, Palmerston and people like that. If in doubt, send a gunboat and blow everyone out of the water. Well, the truth levels haven't actually exponentially grown with the technology, and anything that technologically spreads the balance of economic power more evenly across the world is to be resisted by the armaments corporations, the Bilderberg Group, and the other various people who sit around tables that we are not even supposed to know about. So quite honestly, if something like this is going to affect the power, the grip that these people have on the world, and now let's face it, we only have one world's policeman, which is a real problem. The days have gone when Khrushchev and Kennedy could ring each other and say, you get him out into line, it's your problem. That's gone. So the transfer of economic power is to be resisted by these people at all costs. So I'm not surprised, and I can only echo everything Marcus has said.
You know, I've always had this feeling that I'm not really from here. But how many of you have had that feeling? Right. Yeah. Two things. One, aliens. In my limited experience of meditation, the closer I get to some kind of source, the more I get removed from my individual sense of consciousness, then the more beauty and love and incredible some other dimensional consciousness exists beyond this one. That's all I've ever experienced. And so I think aliens, I think I'm not sure that they're real. I think they may well be us, actually, just a dimension of us that we haven't quite got in touch with yet, and that manifests, and it can manifest into this reality, and it's somehow manifesting projections of what we feel alienated from. So aliens are almost inevitably bad news, apart from E.T., that was a bit of a blip in it. They're out to get us, they're invaders, they're enemies, they're going to control us and all that. Well, that's a classic projection of the American psyche and Hollywood. So this is just where I'm at with aliens. I don't actually give them much time. The second question is, would I give myself, humanity, unlimited energy right now, free? No way. And I mean, if you look at what they do with it, I mean, that means separate myself from them, what we do with it in our unconscious state, destroying the forests, polluting the ocean, I wouldn't want to speed that up right now. The less advanced technology we get, the better right now. So that's kind of where I'm at with alien technologies and suppression. I mean, I'm open to it all being true, and I'm just being naive. But it's not part of my, thank goodness, not part of my universe.
Don't abduct me.
I had my first psychic experience when I was 4 years old, and I heard a voice in my head that started to guide me. And as a kid, that was the most natural thing in the world. And at the age of 4, I started to walk between worlds, and have been walking between worlds ever since. And my lifelong search has been to understand the truth about who we really are. And what I shared with you this afternoon was a tiny bit of that sense that we are ultimately all one, and that reality is played out on many, many different levels. And what I feel at the moment is that what is unfolding, what is culminating, what is being birthed, has guidance and support on incredible levels that we're barely aware of. And when I look what's playing out within the conspiracies and the intentions of control, like Peter, when I really tune in to who I really am and all that we really are, I realise just how feeble it is, and how ultimately it'll be a bit like Canute trying to hold back the tide. That there is a tide, there is a tidal change that we're all part of not just at the level of our personalities and our consciousness, but part of as our soul level. And it seems to me that what's happening alongside all the turmoil, alongside all the chaos, is that we are opening up and remembering who we really are. And as we do so, we go beyond the polarities that we've played out for so long. And it's like we've been there, bought the T-shirt, and it's time to move on. And as I said this afternoon, to grow up. So yes, I've met aliens. Yes, as my mum used to say, I'll talk with anybody. And I have and I do. I work with archangels, I work with ascended masters, I work with extraterrestrials, I work with those who call themselves intraterrestrials. And I've met the guys at Roswell. I've met the guy, the undertaker, who was there at the time the alien bodies were brought in. I've done a lot of this work. I've worked with people who work with ex-CIA agents who can't take it anymore. But what I do when I feel all of that is compassion for that sense of separation and that sense of fear that still flows through all of that. And for my own choice, and I suspect for some of our choices, it's a choice of love rather than fear. It's not a choice of rose-tinted glasses. I know exactly what's going on. I know exactly what's going on. But my own choice is to transcend that and stop the tit-for-tat, polarity-based, ego-based fear that we've been living in for so long.
Oh.
Someone from this side? Ooh, crikey, I'll have to bend over.
Hello. You make me cry. You are just the most amazing creature. And I won't waffle on, because I know we haven't got time, but my own experience is that I started to hear things in 1997, and unlike Jude, I wasn't a little girl. I was a huge adult creature, and I fell off. I fell off big time. So I know what it's like to get this stuff channeled, and what you were saying about the Vatican and the mafia. Yeah, I've had that. I've been told this stuff myself, and I'm sure that a lot of people here today have been on that crazy edge and wondered whether or not we were sane. We've probably all been there at some point in time. But what I'd like to know, because there's a lot of stuff going around and being talked about now that is cutting edge, it's cutting edge science, and there's a ring, an eclipse ring, a diamond ring that's being created here, where science and belief, call it religion if you want, call it faith, whatever you want, are starting to bring themselves together in a circuit to create that eclipse. And what I'd like to know from the panel is what you feel might possibly be the manifestation of that point when that diamond goes bang and something really happens.
Answer that.
What a fantastic question. Gosh, I'm not sure I know, but when you spoke, that image of the solar eclipse, just think about what a solar eclipse is. Here we have in the sky the most exquisite example of cosmic harmony. We have a moon that is a few thousand miles across and 250,000 miles away. We have a sun that's 800,000 miles across and 93 million miles away. And yet, when they come together in the sky, they create a perfect union. And the point of the diamond ring, for those of you who don't know, when you get a solar eclipse and the moon comes in front of the sun, it is such a perfect match that you get complete darkness. But of course, they're both moving as we are. And there's a split second when they begin to move away again, when there is a flash of light, the first flash of light, and that is the diamond ring. And what I feel is that what that cosmic, exquisite harmony is showing us is that reality is played out through the male and the female and the child. It's played out through the heart and the mind and the purpose. And all the ancient spiritual traditions recognize that in the sun we have a sense of mind, in the moon we have the sense of heart, and in the earth we have our sense of higher purpose. And it feels to me that as they come together within us, we bring together heart and mind and purpose, and we create that diamond ring within each and every one of us. And for me, what it's about is remembering who we really are, remembering that we are divine beings, perfect beyond measure, expressing all that we are through our human journey. And I will still like chocolate biscuits and red wine.
What's that?
If there's a chocolate biscuit fetish going on here, that's definitely. I think one of the interesting aspects of a question such as that is that things that we actually can mathematically and empirically answer, or that yield to, as I mentioned earlier on in the day, things that yield to formulation and therefore precise results, we tend to actually label as science. We accept that it's moved out of the mystical and moved out of the possible into the realms of confirmable, repeatable reality. Therefore, that becomes to us science. I think one of the encouraging things at the moment, I think everyone thinks that there is an acceleration of what is going on towards what not all of us know. But some of the, if it isn't scientific, therefore it does technically, to my mind anyway, lie in the realms of philosophy. Now, philosophy holds within its basic tenets not only politics, ethics, logic, aesthetics. The ethical part of that's quite interesting because as we develop technologically more and more, we are less capable, it seems, of coping with what we invent because man seems not to be able to acquire the concomitant wisdom to deal with his inventions in a terribly ethical way. We invent things to blow each other up, fine. Lots of technology is fantastic. We then go and abuse a lot of the things that we create. Sure. No, absolutely right. But my feeling is that because of the speeding up, if you like, of the consciousness aspect of things, in other words, as I said earlier, the things that actually bring us joy, joy without having goals, spontaneity, what happens today is actually crucially important. We don't have to know everything. And you may also argue that actually we in terms of spirituality, because we actually are, as far as we are concerned, I think the only species not merely concerned with survival, we then have to actually recognize that because of the acceleration in what's happening to us, a lot of those philosophical tenets are beginning to move towards the scientific end of the equation. I think the scientists actually are starting to believe that. They're starting to give the philosophical end of the equation more credibility, as are the philosophers who are able to ask the questions of the scientists. So in other words, it's beginning to blur together. So I am hopeful, strangely enough. Technology won't bail us out. Our proper ethical handling of the nicer aspects of technology will help us out.
Connections to the earth and the sky, the universe, has always been a very important part of Native traditions. We're one with that all the time. We're constantly paying attention to the eclipses, to the changes of the sun and the moon cycles, the rising of the moon, or the sun, sunsets. Everything is a matter of balance in the universe, and it becomes very important to us to constantly be connected to this all the time, both mind, body, and spirit, from the place of the heart, always. Sometimes we'll say we connect our heartbeat to the heartbeat of the Earth Mother, and we connect our heartbeat to the heartbeat of the sky. Like that, it becomes important. One of the things that I see that the star glyphs, what's going on with the star glyphs, or the crop circles, is a very unique thing is going on here. Because people who haven't really been connected into these type of things in the past, and what I see is doors opening up for these people in these very special spaces where they have allowed themselves for a moment to open up their connections to the earth and the universe through experiencing the formations that are appearing in the fields, feeling that these are of some higher order and higher understanding, opening up these doorways and allowing themselves to expand their true selves and their true understanding and their true connections to the universe. And it's the coming together of these symbols, which are mathematical in origin from the mind, and this place of science, very much like that. The coming together of these two things in a place of balance. It's like the universe is teaching these things to the people to open up these understandings and then take themselves to a higher place. Oh, we're staying. Oh.
Diamond Consciousness. It's part of the Tibetan tradition, so whenever I hear that word, I tune in to the teachings we've had about Diamond Consciousness. And if a diamond is perfectly cut, it reflects all light. So inside it's completely dark. And there's a meditation, Black Diamond Tantra, where we do this. We've been doing this in Glastonbury, actually, in a dance group, where you meditate on creating a diamond sheath around yourself. And then inside that diamond sheath, you become, as you align your consciousness with that space inside, you become dark and black and nothing. And in that space, there's a link to the nothingness that birthed us all and underlines all reality. Everything we see, every physical thing, is born from this dark nothingness. In my tradition, that would be Kali. And so, why are we doing this? And then eventually the dance form was revealed, and we did this here in Glastonbury on the 20th of December last year, when there was an alignment between the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, Pluto, the outermost planet and the ruler of all of this dark underworld, and the galactic center itself. And we were shown that we needed to do a dance on that very moment, which was just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We prepared for a 13-moon cycle, and in the final month, I had a core of dancers who were going through tantric meditations and deep kundalini training so that they could go into a trance at that very moment. Then we had a circle drawn from all over Britain. People came to participate in the dance. It wasn't advertised and it cost nothing. It was a word-of-mouth thing for people who wanted to do that. It was a shamanic dance. And we actually were guided to do this from the Native American tradition of the ghost dance. When the Native Americans were faced with the annihilation of their culture, when the medicine peoples said to the warriors, there's no point in fighting. They'd already fought the military to a standstill. The Native American Indians were regarded as the best cavalry in the world, by the second best cavalry in the world. But the second best cavalry in the world showed up with overwhelming numbers and reneged on all the treaties and were taking over the land, and I'm sure you know the story of Wounded Knee. The Native American response to that was to dance. And what they did was dance for 4 days and 4 nights, almost to death, a warrior dance, where they drew the energy from the earth into the dance. They drew the energy from the heart, and they made a prayer. And that prayer, coupled with incredible, powerful energy, because some of those warriors were going to certain death, the prayer was that this so-called enemy, the children of the children of the children of those soldiers, would eventually come to see that we're one human being, that the ways of the red man are true human being. And with that, they went to their deaths. And that prayer form, in some way, has brought, if you go to any of the festivals and you see the teepees and you see the fact that we bring over Native American people now, the medicine people at the time said, there will come a time when our ways will be respected. And that time is now. And we have, the teachers are back. I feel with this event that we've been talking about, galactic waves and so on, we may be approaching another end time where we may see the end of this civilization and its ways. And we have to be in that same space, that same prayer space. And so we're preparing here, we're dancing, and we're opening our hearts, and we're aligning with that inner space, which is totally invulnerable and totally surrendered. And in that prayer on the day when we were here, when we were dancing, nobody knew. It was choreographed on the day. Nobody knew what would happen. But actually what happened at the point of the dance, the actual point was, here we are, Mother. This is the best we are. And it was an incredible moment because all of the beauty of our music and our dance and our human heart was manifested in that moment with the dancers. And it's just like saying, nobody can take this away from us. Nothing, even the galactic shockwave, cannot touch us. And we have evolved and we're here. And we're at your mercy or your grace. So it's kind of where I feel the diamond is important. Yeah.
You ask about the diamond point. What is that? Like a tipping point? Something that comes together?
What's your best guess as to what might actually manifest to bring that science and faith together to the point that we can all connect and recognize it on a conscious level?
Okay. There's a ring of diamonds. This room is one of them. The people in it are one of them. We come from many different places around the country, around the planet. And we arrive in this room here. And you've been in other rooms, in other places, in other countries where similar people meet and discuss similar things. The process has started. The process has been going on for generations. The teachers of the past have told us the same things. Whichever teacher you listen to, they say the same things in different languages, in different countries, in different places. Gandhi said something. Be the change you wish to see in the world. It's that simple. There's nothing complicated. There's nothing even metaphysical about it. There's a poem in the Eden Project, which I believe that's not the original place it appeared. It has come from somewhere in the long-distant past, and it seems appropriate to sum it up. Work like you don't need the money. Sing like nobody's listening. Dance like nobody's watching. Love like you've never been hurt. And live like it's heaven on earth. That's all.
Okay, let's take another question from this side. Any other questions on this side? Oh, if not, we'd better go to the gentleman over there then.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think I think you're right fundamentally, but I'm from a pragmatic tradition, and as I have children, I feel duty-bound to fight rather than dance to oblivion. And the parallel community is an interesting start to a resistance movement, but we can only work within the traditional guidelines of movements. We can't resort to terrorism as such. So the nerve of the war is money. And money, although it's a dirty word among us, is probably what we are going to have to concentrate on organizing to build community, resist the decomposition of our freedom, and I think that we should concentrate on persuading figures like the people of the Eden Project, like Al Gore, Richard Branscombe, people who have influence and money, however corrupt they may be, they are still probably on our side. I find that we are a little too orientated towards an elitist view of the situation. We are congratulating ourselves on being a higher vision of the way things are spinning, but I think we have to concentrate on finding a pragmatic response to survive, so that some of us will survive this crash that you're talking about, which will come, but we have to know how to organize our communities and our offspring to continue the fight after whatever is going to happen to us. That's all really that I want to say. I hope we can work together to this end.
Well, if I could be the first to answer that, I think the concept behind one of the reasons why we started the parallel community was basically this, that many of us felt that the way that the things were headed, both locally, nationally, internationally, wasn't terribly clever, and that really violation of freedom. And I think very shortly after people discussed the word peace, you have to say freedom very quickly afterwards. One is actually very closely twined with the other. Now, the parallel community thing actually, as far as we were concerned, offers a practical solution to a lot of people who think that they're just a small individual. And instead of saying, well, I can't do anything, what can you do to actually say, stand up and say, listen, we need to have our collective voice counted here, because an awful lot of people seem to be pretty meek and mild about having their democratic rights completely trampled on, and really don't care to have their voice heard, or they're too embarrassed, or they're too meek. So parallel community really is set to actually run alongside the existing structures. You're quite right. By actually dancing, singing, etc., is not going to change the world as a direct result for your children immediately. But it's an incredibly crucial part. A practical thing has to be done to say, look, we don't care. The direction that you are taking us, people that we actually vote into office, the direction in which you're taking us is not satisfactory. Now, when more people vote for a guy who wins Pop Idol on television than actually elects the Labour government, you have to actually question the quality of our democracy. And our democracy is a very much traduced word. So fundamentally, what we at Parallel Communities have set out to do and begin a very slow beginning to get a side-by-side system going that brings all these people who do feel enormously disenfranchised. It took 96 years to get the vote for everyone in this country over the age of 21. In the last 10 years, we've seen more erosions of our democratic freedoms taken away than we care to count. And most of us are not even aware of it. Just before the election in May 2005, is there anyone in this audience who's familiar with the Inquiries Act? No, very few. Now, what the Inquiries Act before the May general election was pushed under the carpet. When someone comes and does something pretty tragic in your neighbourhood, you used to be able to call a thing called a public inquiry, presided over by an independent judge. The Labour Party have actually removed that right. If there is a public inquiry and they don't like the way it's going, they close it down, pass all the power to the minister. Tough luck. You weren't asked, nobody consulted you. That is so an independent public inquiry presided over by a judge no longer exists. Did you know about it? Obviously not. That's not the only example. So we are just being rolled over, and it's not good enough. So frankly, if we want to hand a world that's decent to our children and our grandchildren, it's time we stood up and said, excuse me, you do not do this in our name. How can anyone take us to a war we will never win in Iraq? And the mess of Afghanistan is just a waste of money, life, and it must join the list of waste and destruction of freedom that we appear to be agreeing to. Now, that's not quite right. Now, the opposition to this has to begin locally, and it will steamroller nationally and hopefully internationally, where people say, hang on, enough. This is not good enough. Because, frankly, it isn't.
Disharmony, anger thrown out to the world, and the hate and things that we see out there at the moment do not create more harmony in the world. They do not take things to a higher order. They take things to a lower order of understanding. But there's a lot of people who believe that these things will take us to a higher order. Disharmony creates more of the same, disharmony. Compassion, higher consciousness, we're talking about dancing and things like that. These things do take us to a higher place. It takes our hearts to a higher place, and it creates solutions that are higher in understanding. I'm not saying that that's the solution to these things. I'm saying these take us to a higher place. It puts us more in the frame of mind that does bring about the things that are necessary to take it to a higher place. And so I believe that the people here in this particular audience are in a unique place because you have been touched by the star glyphs. The star glyphs to me are something that are of higher order. So I believe that everyone here in some small way sees the star glyphs as something that's doing something, and I believe that almost most people feel that it is something taking us to another place, another understanding that's beyond this stuff that's moving around on the planet in this wind right now, this tremendous disharmony that's going on, that these things are going to evolve us to another place. I really think that most of the people really feel that in their search and understanding. Oh, they don't have the answer for it. They don't have the answer for it, but I think you feel it in your spirit and you know it's there, and you're searching for the way to reach out there and use these type of things to evolve the planet yourself in your own way. Or state. Hope.
I have a 16-year-old daughter who's kind of punky and hangs out in festivals a lot. But she said, Dad, I want you to come and see a film. And it's in Bath, so it's quite away from here. So off I went. And it's called Taking Liberties. Has anyone seen it? I really recommend it. It's a documentary on, and it's very funny, and it's poking fun at the establishment, but it's a documentary on all of the liberties that have been taken away in the last 10 years, what we've just been talking about. And I am aware of the inquiries thing. It is being opposed. Actually, there's been full-page advertisements in some of the major newspapers by all of the environmental groups, particularly the Council for the Protection of Rural England. There is serious opposition to it, and the government is determined to push it through because that is the way it gets turbines and nuclear power stations and the whole deal. So I recommend that you get locally active, you find out about it, just one letter to your MP, just to signal that somebody's watching. So I don't think it's a question of, and I dance. I don't think it's a question of either or. For me, I've tried to do both for the last 20 years, and it's been a bit of a stretch. In all of that time, I've spent rather too much time probably trying to change things. And we have changed certain things. They don't x-ray pregnant women anymore. That wasn't my work, that was Alice Stewart. But they don't dump nuclear waste in the ocean. And that was something I was involved in. We have changed some things. However, what my teachers are saying is, come on, Peter, there is not much time left. These things are very slow. And in terms of communities and weathering whatever kind of wave is coming, and I have an idea of that on the scientific level, those communities are already in existence. A community is built over, I would say, at least 30 years, where people trust each other and they will support each other. So if you're not already in such a community, it's probably too late. And when people have asked me, just on a straightforward level, not to do with galactic superwaves or whatever, but in terms of the climate changing, where's the best place to go? And think, oh yeah, they're thinking water supplies, they're thinking energy supplies, warmth and all of that. But actually said the biggest factor is going to be in a community that accepts you and that looks after you and has skills. How many of us know how to grow food? How many of you know that? I don't. I can't do it. I mean, I've lived on the land for several months, and I know I can do it. I know I can live a very simple life, but I can't feed myself. That requires generations of skills to cope with climate change and all of that. So I would say the seeds of the future have to be in place now, and I think they are. So I kind of feel a little bit like we are really in the ballroom of the Titanic. And it's going to go down. And some people, you know, there are lifeboats, but there was never enough. They weren't designed in at the beginning. And so it's like, okay, let's get the violins out and let's dance, you know. But not in a sense of hopelessness, but in a sense of joy. Because we all have to go someday. And so in terms of this 2012 thing, we've been given a deadline. So it's like, let's sharpen our consciousness. Let's surrender. Let's not be attached. Let's trust that enough human beings are doing the right thing in the right place. They will survive. And I'm not attached. I'm quite happy to go down with the ship. And I have children. And they don't listen to me much, but I kind of say, look, something's coming. So at least they know, and it's their choice. But I mean, they're switched into enjoying life as it is now. So it is. It's both. It's both be practical, be political, and get out and dance.
That was a very interesting question because there's a dichotomy in that question. You're quoting a great deal of doom, gloom, and disaster. Where did you get it from? Where did you acquire that knowledge? The knowledge was... Say again? Okay. How did you acquire the information? There were two sources open to you, television and newspapers. Okay, I'm coming to big business. You acquire information. Most people acquire information in the same way as everybody else does, through television, through newspapers. And we trust it, because we have no alternative, we think. A small experiment, which you can conduct yourself, with no buy or leave from anybody, and nobody's going to judge you for doing it, is to switch the television off and don't read a newspaper. Now, what will that get you? Uninformed is probably your first response. Well, I won't know what's going on in the world. How can I make a decision about it? Well, if you make a decision about what you do know that's going on in the world, how are you sure that you're not being guided to that decision by forces that you're not being aware of? Now, newspapers being commercial operations are reliant on on income from their advertisers and from their circulation. The circulation pays for the printing, the paper costs money, it pays people to cut the trees down, ship them over, pulp them up and get them into newsprint. And the advertising pays the profits to the shareholders and pays the staff. I know, I print a magazine. That's the breakdown. Now, if a newspaper decides to carry out a campaign against the nuclear industry, there will be a gradual withdrawal of advertising from certain large companies associated with the nuclear industry within that newspaper group. They're not about to cut their own throat. So the information you receive through newsprint is not necessarily unbiased. As long as you know that, you can interpret it. You can read between the lines. Television is precisely the same. You may say the BBC is independent. Yes, it is. It doesn't rely on advertising, and it can do things that commercial television would not attempt to do. Jeremy Clarkson would certainly not attempt to say some of the rude comments he makes about some of the cars he road tests if he was on commercial television, because, as we know, when he made rude remarks about Renaults a few years ago, the head of Renault said, "Pull our advertising from the BBC," which shows how much they knew about advertising. But that was a real enough threat. So the information that you're acquiring comes with a taint. It comes with a bias. It comes with an emphasis. If you know that, you can interpret it. If you don't know that, you're flotsam on the water, a cork in the ocean, pushed from pillar to post, told what to believe, and will generally believe it. Now, people... Say again? Right. There is no such person as everyone. A generality is always a dangerous statement to make. Certain individuals may well be persuaded otherwise. If you read the newspapers over the last week, you'd think the whole of the UK was underwater. In fact, it's a tiny little area with less than a mile wide. All right, it's upset and caused great devastation to the people involved, but it is an emphasis in an area where newspapers will sell because people love disaster. Now, if you are not prepared to go along with that, and the point you make is very valid, stop reading the papers, stop watching the television, do not become influenced by it. All right, you can say, I don't want to drop out of society. No. You're not dropping out of society. You are creating the alternative you ask for. Be the change you want to see in the world. Thank you.
I think there are a couple of points I'd like to add to everybody else's. I think the first one is that somehow we tend to associate with love being meek and feeble and a bit fluffy. And for me, that's completely misunderstanding what love's all about. For me, what love is the most powerful force in the universe. Love is incredibly practical. My mother, when my father died when I was 10 and my brother was 7, loved us unconditionally. She went out to work and worked every hour that God sent because she loved us. And it seems to me that we need to start associating love with action, with strength, with empowerment. And so much in our world is polarizing our perspective between love and fear. And I feel that a lot of what's, with all due respect, sir, and I wholeheartedly understand what you're saying, that we, all of us, in every moment, can make choices from fear or from love. And it seems to me that that is our choice, and it's a very practical choice. Because if we work from fear, fear for me is the opposite of love. Hate isn't the opposite of love, fear is. Love is about coming together. Fear is about separation. And there's something here that when we fear, we separate ourselves. We see the world as a scarce place. We see it as a frightening place. We see it as a threatening place. We see ourselves as separate. It seems to me that the more we can make our choices from love in a very practical way, the more we can, as we've all been saying, I think, earlier on, become more coherent as a whole. But the other side of it is the way we describe ourselves in the world. I mean, Peter said about the deadline of 2012. I've been writing a lot of books lately, and when I started to see that I was up against a deadline, I put huge pressure on myself. So what I started to call it instead was a lifeline. And somehow my whole attitude to writing the thing changed. And it seems to me that there's a lot we can do very simply and very practically to live our lives in a more abundant, a more empowered, a more practically loving way. And I feel that's the way forward. And I think that's for us, and I think that's for our children. I mean, the Native Americans have a tradition that when we make a choice, we make it for 7 generations forward. It seems to me that if we make a choice from love, that ripples through space and time.
Okay, let's have one from this side. Here we are.
I've had a glass of wine in the dinner, so I don't know how coherent I'm going to be, an attempt to be. I just, very quickly, I've got 2 quick questions, well, fairly quick. I just wanted to say first that I had a dream, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was going through, it looked like different time loops. They were kind of like almost from one dimension to another, and they looked very much like the loops that have been coming up in the fields to do with the portals connecting time together. And everyone I went into, I remember thinking it wasn't my Earth, because things seemed to be getting worse and worse, and there's more and more soldiers, until the last one, it was so bad that everybody, it was barbed wire and guns, and it was horrible. It was very negative. And I thought I wasn't going to get out alive out of that one, but I managed to find another whole dimensional thing, leaped into that. And I came out in this place, went onto a balcony, and there's a most overwhelming feeling of love. And I had the sense that things had to get so bad, like an abscess bursting, in order for them to completely change. And I had that love is the greatest power in the universe came to me as well, which was why I wanted to say that. Now, I woke up crying. It was really powerful for me. 2 questions in reverse. The second one's kind of to the panel, although specifically more to Peter, but it is to the panel as well about, which he's kind of referred to quite a bit, about the wave that's coming. And I just wanted to throw that open as to what people felt that possibly could be. But the other question, which is what I'd like answered first, is to Peter, and that was to do with your talk earlier on. You talked, I found very interesting, and I really thought everything you said I resonated with, but I was interested because you talked about, I may have misunderstood this, about the solar cycles, or to do with the sun diminishing its activity or something. And yet, as far as I'm aware, I know the last period of solar cycles, 2001 or something, it was more active than it's ever been before in terms of the solar flares. You know, I remember reading every day, there was a greater solar flare than it ever happened before, so I was just wondering how that fit in.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to comment on the wave as well, but dealing with the solar activity, as you probably know, that the solar cycle is about 11 years long. And if you look at the monitoring of that over the last, say, 150 years through sunspots and much more sophisticated instruments in the most recent time, the last 50 years, and the way in which you can work out proxies for what it was doing for 1,000 years, then we're now at a historic high, an unprecedented high of solar activity. And that's been building up over 150 years at least, and there have been cycles before. So it's going like this, boing, 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 till about 1950, when it was kind of going like that on a sort of plateau. And Theodore Landscheid, who I mentioned earlier, was able to predict that the 2000 high, they're about every 10 years, these high points. So 2000, 1990, 1980, and so forth. And he was able to predict from mathematics, from kind of harmonics. And he wasn't looking at the physics of the sun. That the 1990 cycle, which is called cycle 22, and he was able to predict that cycle 23, which is the 2001, would be down on that previous high. And he was right, and NASA predicted it would be equal or higher, and they were wrong. So the last solar cycle, 23, was about a third less than the previous one. But that's measuring a particular aspect. You can measure different aspects of the solar cycle. You can measure the proton wind. You can measure the magnetic field. And you can measure certain radio waves. And they each indicate a different aspect of what the sun is doing. So when you do that, the actual solar peak in relation to the climatic effect, in my judgment, and it's a little bit complicated, was sometime between 1990 and 1997, roughly. Since then, the magnetic activity has dropped. We're now in the trough of a solar cycle, and some solar scientists, particularly NASA, believe that if you study the magnetics of the sun, and we've got the instruments to do that now, which we've only had recently, you can predict how high it's going to go next. And they put out a prediction about a year ago, and they said it's going to be as high, it's going to be higher. And all of the other scientists were saying, you know, the sun is going to carry on and so forth, but it won't have any effect on climate. But it hasn't started its cycle. She is late with her period, about a year. And the later she is, the less amplitude in the next cycle. So they've had to revise that, but Theodore Landscheid predicted this cycle, 24, which will peak in a few years' time. It's not even started yet, so it's 4 or 5 years off its peak, would be a third down on the previous one. So it's ramping down. And then the next one after that, 2020, flat. And he said there's an 85% probability it'll stay flat for 100 years, and we enter a little ice age. Now, that is the solar cycle. And what they will tell you is, but the temperature's still going up after the solar cycle has peaked and is going down. So you've got solar magnetics are going down, the temperature's still going up. Well, partly the temperature is not still going up. It depends what you measure and when. And secondly, you would expect a time lag due to the ocean effects that I talked about. And that's what I'm working on right now. I'm trying to kind of make sense of it and work out when will be the first year when you notice the temperature really dropping. And actually, Landscheid said it would be this year. And this year, the jet stream has shifted, and we've got this amazing change in weather patterns. That's your summer now. You wait till the winter. So we're watching very carefully. Now, in this work that I've been doing, being aware of the Mayan prophecies, being aware of my own teacher's prophecies, and thinking, okay, a wave that we can't see coming. So it can't be any large, big physical object. We'd see that coming. It's instantaneous, and it changes consciousness. So I've been going back, and actually a friend of mine introduced me to 2 very interesting books, one by Paul LaViolette called Earth Under Fire, and the other by some NASA scientists led by Richard Firestone. And this is very interesting for me because I've studied in depth as an ecologist the wipeout of large mammal faunas 13,500 years ago. Almost anything larger than a small deer was completely wiped out of North America, a lot of Northern Europe. And it was assumed that it was hunters that did that. Well, it was a bit unlikely, but, maybe. But the recent data from these NASA scientists, they found evidence of a massive wave of dust particles traveling at the speed of sound, very fast, microscopic, interestingly with a high content of diamond and iridium. And that is cosmic dust. The balance of isotopes and everything is cosmic dust. It would be like getting hit by a 12 bore at 3 feet. Boof. if you were a mammoth, and humans as well. People disappeared from the whole of the North American continent for 1,000 years. These were the Clovis people, and you can analyze the little arrow tips that they have, and the bits that were uppermost on the ground are pitted with cosmic rays, the tracks of cosmic rays. And so the huge event happened 13,500 years ago. And this is a key point in a larger cycle, 26,000 years, some of you all know. So I thought, all right, well, so time is up. There's another cycle due. I'm also interested in the 5,000-year cycle and been looking for a signal 5,000 years ago, and I actually did find some data the other day that showed a signal. It's not global, but some part of the hemisphere got hit 5,000 years ago, and there was a big shift, there's a big change, and lots of civilizations changed at that point as well. So what could it be? And I think it can vary. My current understanding, and it's really just a hypothesis, is that the center of the galaxy is quiet at the moment. We're a spiral galaxy. Paul the Violet looked at all of the other spiral galaxies, and he was trained in astronomy, and discovered that for either 85% of them and 15%, 85% were quiet and 15% were active, or they're all active and quiet at different times, and that would be my assumption. So that the galactic centers somehow put out an energy, and this energy can be measured in radio waves. Now, all radio waves mean is that there's one heck of an energy moving stuff around, and it vibrates and creates radio waves. So something moves in the center of the galaxy, and it's a bit like a bubble expanding. There's nothing inside the bubble, but it's got force. And what it does is it collects on the expanding edge of the bubble the dilute plasma that exists in intergalactic, interplanetary, interstellar space. So the wave is actually protons and electrons and whatever dust is in the cosmos. And that is what's moving out it's accelerated to close to the speed of light. It's called relativistic electrons. And that wave, when that wave hits certain stars at certain points in the star cycle, which, as you probably know, some stars are young, some are old, and there's all kinds of stars out there. There are even diamond stars. And certain stars are vulnerable to these waves. They are caused to implode, and that's your supernova. Now, 13,500 years ago, a wave of cosmic dust hit with enormous effect. And that was the debris wave from a supernova explosion that occurred about 20,000 years before then. 41,000 years ago was the supernova explosion. A wave of gamma rays hit, light form, be like a blue star suddenly appearing as powerful as the sun in the sky. Thousands of years later, a shock wave hits, and thousands of years after that, debris, traveling much slower, hits. So we've already gone through that, and the data is pretty good, I think, in terms of the signatures in the sediments and so on. It's a very recent material, and it's from NASA respected scientists. So my question is, supposing there were a galactic wave that didn't cause a supernova to explode, or these exploded on the other side of the galaxy, what would it be like to receive a galactic wave that is not carrying whatever? I don't know the answer to that. And what is it? And when I meditated on this and asked what is going on, this is what I was given. We are microcosms. Our consciousness is actually galactically born. Any astrologer will tell you you're a galactic being. And through Kundalini meditation, we learn to access an energy form which is not measurable physically, but is enormously powerful. So it's almost as if the galactic center itself can release this energy. It's a bit like a kind of orgasmic release. And that creates the ripple through space and time. And there would be no warning. And then what my guru said was interesting. He said, this wave will transform consciousness, which is what a Kundalini wave does. And in yoga, you work up to that very, very slowly. You have to prepare the whole of your energy system and your body, otherwise you're going to fry your brain and your body. So, what my teacher said was, tune in, don't be attached. And in a way, those who are prepared, and I don't think it's about loads and loads of experience in Kundalini and meditation practice. I think it's about where your consciousness is at, whether you can surrender to what's happening, and whether you can tune in to that part of the self, the human being, that is above all material reality. And that's not hard to do, actually. It just takes a little bit of a shift, and all children can do it. So that way, one can ride the wave. And that's all I know. Now, I was very intrigued by Horace Drew's presentation. And I thought, well, has he had a signal and has he had a timing? And I just called him for a moment. I don't think he's here right now. And he said yes. So it's pretty soon. I mean, August the 18th, I think, was the first date. It doesn't mean that that's when the wave's coming, but something is being signaled from that energy source, from the crop circles about that time. And I'm no wiser. But one interesting thing, he said that in Silbury Hill, there were some bodies interned all that time ago, 5,000 years ago. And he said something about the flood and, to avoid something. But what intrigues me is that all of the dolmens, all of the structures that I've been in, and have been called burial mounds, and I'm sure many of you know that there's much more sophisticated than that. They also had an enormous protective cover. Stones and earth. A lot of the dolmens don't have that anymore. They just have the big stones, the things people couldn't take away that weighed 8 or 10 tons. But all of the stones above them, like Newgrange, which had to be rebuilt, why go to all that trouble? Why create such an incredible amount of protection? It's the same with pyramids. And I thought, well, maybe it's because they could meditate without cosmic rays and so on, but maybe it was also protection. And the medicine peoples or the magicians or priests or whatever you want to call them, maybe they knew what was coming. And maybe and there are quite big chambers in these places, people could hit, So maybe they knew, and maybe they were hiding and waiting to come back out and, deal with whatever happened above the surface. I don't know. But this is where I'm going with it. And for those of you who are tuning into the website that I gave, I will put this up in whatever the results of this research, as soon as I can. And I want to talk to many scientists on this level. So it's all very new for me. Thank you.
It's all.
Stay. There's another kind of wave that exists in my traditions. It's considerably different. It's a wave that's created by people across the planet, and the energies that they're walking with and journeying with at that moment, and the influences that they put out on this wave that circles the entire planet is very, very powerful. At the moment, because of what's going on in the planet, this wave has a tremendous negative force into it at the moment, influencing people at very, very strong, in very strong ways. If you happen to so move into places that are less than a higher understanding, it can really shift you and pull your energy. So it's a matter of understanding how this energy is created and changing it for ourselves. There's a confusion that exists around what force and power are. Power, a lot of people out here think power is this ability to control other things and things like that. Actually, that's force. Force is this ability to change and have control other people. Power is a rainstorm, a river, lightning. and a very gentle wind that blows softly through the heart. That's true power. And more can be changed through that than anything else on the planet. It carries tremendous power in it. And yet it's this very subtle energy. So you get what you concentrate on, what you put out there, what you focus on, what you put your energy into is what you will create within your world. That's what you will build as an energy within yourself. So what you see and how you see that becomes important to notice within oneself what they do with things so that they can see how they create an energy that influences this wave of energy that moves across the planet, that influences all things. We call this in my way the way of the ectomy, or the sacred spider, that all things are connected. What you do influences everything that exists. So we might say in my way, you hold a piece of this web, and if you shake this web, you shake the whole web. And so people are trying to understand the nature of these connections like that. So you get what you concentrate on, and it becomes important to notice those things so that the planet can change to where it needs to change to. Oh, more stay.
Oh. I think the really important thing, as Peter mentioned, is actually preparedness. I think a lot of us here would actually admit that there is something going on, but we can't quite put our finger on it. A realization, perhaps, that what is going on isn't actually quite right. And I see it rather like this. I mean, a lot of things are personally happening to me. For example, I have stopped taking the newspapers because I worked it out. I'm a creature of habit. I'm reading the same guys and actually the same stories every day of my life. The televisions actually are leaving at the end of August. My TV license expires, and I suddenly realize there's nothing here I want to see. They took the test matches away from me, and I'm not lining Murdoch's pocket. Okay? So all sorts of things, that there is definitely changes happening that you think, well, something's happening here which actually is causing me to make some... Those are not big changes, but they are lifestyle changes. And after 6 months without the newspapers, you do start actually to, as Marcus rightly says, another reality starts to creep in. And it's really much more real. It's not quite so fearsome anymore. The lousy stories are just not appearing. In our parallel community, we actually subscribe to a positive news newspaper. And actually, it's incredible. Do you know what? They don't spread sedition and rubbish. Good news actually is out there. It's just that we don't get to hear about it. So I think as far as the entire what is coming next, I think Peter's explanation, frankly, is as good as you're going to get anywhere, in my opinion. And I think this question of being prepared for it, if you have in your own lives things that you realize you're not comfortable with anymore, or something strange is going on and you need to make changes, this is probably why. So don't ignore that. Listen to your own intuition and try and start making those changes, because there's a reason. There really is.
Of course, it's all happened already. It's all happened before. We read about it in the history books. But we don't recognize it, and we call it myths and legends, and we ignore it and say they're simple people who didn't know what they were looking at. No, they were sophisticated people, just as sophisticated as we are, who wrote the great books of history, who wrote the books recounting what they observed. All of this has happened before, many, many times. There's nothing new under the sun. 2012 is supposed to be the end of the fifth sun, is it? Or something like that? How long is the sun?
It depends where you look at it. It can be anything between 500.
Okay, 500 to 5,000 years. Let's call it 3,000 to be safe. So 15,000 years ago rather matches what Peter was saying about the events of the last ice age. The last ice age was recorded. There are maps showing it. I'll be showing one tomorrow, as it happens. There's nothing new under the sun. If 2012 is anything, it's a transformation of consciousness. We finally got it. We know what's going on. No more fear, no more worry. Yes, stars explode, the supernovas go on whacking themselves. Galaxies. It's a technical term, yeah, thank you, Jude, technical term. Galaxies whack themselves, and spiral galaxies go hitting each other, and bits fly off and go whizzing past us. And occasionally we capture them in orbit and we call them planets. But have you ever wondered why astrology is such an important science to so many people? And where did it come from? And what's the difference between astrology and astronomy? And why is one recognized as being a major scientific achievement of people spend years studying and become astronomers, who then disparage astrologers as being hippie wastrels, or whatever their latest phrase was? What is it that astrology is frightened? What is it that astronomers are frightened of? More on that tomorrow. But it all comes into it. But there is so much nonsense talked about the disasters that are going to happen to Earth. This planet of ours, this dear beloved planet Earth, this pale blue dot, this shining star, this incredible place we live on, will just shrug off the crap we throw at it. It will, whenever a thing is required to change, it will happen. Within the last 200 years, which in terms of planet Earth, as again I'll show you tomorrow, is hardly an eye bat in time. It is such a small and insignificant time, but humans have gone from horses to canals, to railways, to roads, to aeroplanes, to space travel. That's in about 200 years. We're going to go on doing it at that rate, because that's what the human race is. We may wipe ourselves out. It doesn't really matter, because we're going to start again. We've done it several times already. It's called Atlantis, or Lemuria. Those are the ones we remember. Those are the ones in history that we're familiar with. But they only go back about 30,000 years. The pyramids may predate them. I believe the pyramids are dated by the Kemetians. Kemet is the native name for Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word, Egyptos. That's what the Greeks called it. The Greeks only got there in 330 BC when Alexander walked in. Nobody knows where he's died, so how much the Egyptians know? The Kemetians, i.e. the original native Egyptians, refer to the pyramids as being in excess of 50,000 years old. I'll buy into that, because I don't see any evidence for the contrary. So what we see and what we hear about the history, and again I'll be covering it tomorrow, as to why we believe what we believe, is very simple. It's so simple, it's almost laughable. But it's wrong, what we believe. Tomorrow, more will be explained.
Be there or be square is the something out with that one. Einstein once said, you can see the world as if no miracles, or you can see the world as if everything's a miracle. I'd paraphrase that and say you can see the world as being random and purposeless, or you can see the world as being filled with purpose. And I'm both an astronomer and an astrologer. And I started off being both literally at the age of 5 or 6 or thereabouts. And for me, as I shared earlier on, the cosmos is a wholly interrelated conscious whole, holographically expressed at many, many different levels of awareness. And I was with Paul Violette in Montana a few years ago, and we discussed the superwave. And what we were saying is essentially the way in which a superwave is not so much destructive, it's a harmonic. And that's what you were saying, Peter. These are waves on waves on waves, cycles, spirals, essentially of consciousness exploring itself. And I think that's what we're all saying in our different ways. And we're at a cusp, we're at a culmination, we're a completion of a spiral term, and essentially a shift, potentially, into an emergent order, another turn of the spiral. And As an astronomer, it is incredible how the galaxy orders itself, how emergent order comes out, how we are both children of the earth and children of the stars because we were created in the hearts of stars. When supernovae explode, they do so harmonically. They create interconnecting waves, and where those points, those node points of those interconnections occur, that is the birthplace of stars. This is the most exquisite, incredible, purposeful cosmos, and whatever is coming to me is purposeful. And the work that I started back in 1998, on May the 4th be with me, was very much about seeking to understand what is happening now. And that journey took us around the world. It took us on 13 journeys ultimately. And the culmination of that was an understanding as an astrologer of the alignment, the astrological alignment of our entire solar system with the galactic center. And not just SOLAR, solar system, but SOULAR, the group soul, the matrix of consciousness, that our entire, our Gaia, the sun, the moon, the entirety of our solar system, all our relations have been exploring for 4.5 billion years. So what I would see is a cusp of a wave that in fact goes back to the very beginning of what we call space-time. And what I see is that super wave being a harmonic, a guide, a breakthrough, a portal that is supporting us in making that shift of awareness. And to complete, the gentleman who asked the question about the glass of wine, I'd like to sum up by a quote I heard a few days ago from the runner-up of the Golf Open in 1999. And this guy had been leading the field and was absolutely going to win the Open back in 99. And he hit his ball into the brook. And he took his shoes and socks off and he waded into the brook and he hammered at that bloody ball. And it didn't go anywhere and he lost the Open. He came runner-up. And the interviewer was saying to him, and I think he's French, and the interviewer was saying, you know, that must have been devastating. And you said, oh, no. You said, I see the world as a glass half full. I prefer it if it's a glass of wine, and I prefer it even more if I've drunk the first half. So I think that sums up.
Okay.
Could I come in on something?
Very briefly, because shockingly we're out of time, believe it or not. So this is your last will and testament. What I'm going to say to you, you can start. Last will and testament, say something really amazing, each one in turn, within a reasonable amount of time. Thank you very much. You've got 5 minutes. So, all right, Peter, off you go.
There's something that Bearcloud said, and it suddenly clicked in me that often my thinking is of waves coming to us, which are immensely powerful from the center of the galaxy, and, you know... And actually, very recently I discovered that the whole picture that I presented to you of the sun is only half the story. That many years ago, in the 1920s, Hannes Alfvén, who won a Nobel Prize for physics, he had a totally different picture of the sun. He said, it doesn't shine like you nuclear physicists say. If there's a nuclear reactor in the middle and it's fusion, and there's all this big wave coming, how come the temperature from the center of the sun drops to the edge? And that's not hot enough to shine. And actually, the sun shines in a photosphere on its skin. And he said, that's not in your theories. And they had to say, well, no, but we don't know why it does that. He says, I do. He says, it's an electric arc. I said, but an electric arc needs another current coming in. And he calculated that the negative backflow from that wave that goes out, it's an electric current. It goes out and it comes back, just like the circuit that drives your light bulb. So there's a current going into the sun. I thought, oh, wow. He calculated that there was enough, however, whatever they are, electrons or whatever, going back to create this. But nobody listened to him, but he's still got a Nobel Prize for other work and so forth. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, because that means there's something going back into the sun, a dark energy. And then Spirit said to me, at last you're waking up. The sun is a star. I said, yeah, I still don't get it. I said, well, think about stars on Earth. Oh, Tina Turner? Exactly. She cannot shine unless she's got an audience. And it's the backflow, it's the adoration, it's the heart, it's the dark energy that she takes into her heart and she amplifies and she gives it back. That's how she's born. She'll flourish, she'll die, she'll fade away. That's a star on Earth. Now, the sun is a star. Who's the audience for the sun? 100 billion suns, all with a galactic center. Maybe they're all stars. I thought, okay, I still don't get it. I said, look, the sun had a hit tune. It was like evolution. It was like these incredible creatures, you know, mud and then eventually apes. Oh, yeah? I said, yeah, and these apes became conscious. Oh, yeah, right. They became conscious of consciousness itself. And what was the first thing they did? They then made a big leap to become conscious of the Creator. And that's when dance and song and music all began. So I said, oh, right. So the first hit was to get us conscious. The second hit was to get us conscious of the Creator. And the third hit was that we became creators. So that's the big deal. That's what evolution is all about. Now, you've been doing great guns down on Earth, loads of poetry, loads of music, absolutely fine until very recently. And now you've lost the plot. Digital music. Nobody's out there. Not enough people out there doing it. It's bad music that's causing the climate to do this. Right? I can't sell this one. No, it's true. And so what you need is stop the newspaper, stop the TV, get out a flute, get out a guitar, go down to your local, get real, get music. And that music has to be very special. And this was the Ghost Dance. The music of the Ghost Dance is celebration of who we are. It's real juice. And the sun is listening. And then and it's going to the galaxy. See, I told you these guys could do it.
Okay, Marcus, only shorter, please. Bless you,
sweet. Okay, that's going to be a difficult one. Thanks, Andy. The 100th monkey syndrome. That's where we're at. You all know what 100th monkey syndrome is? Oh, good. No need to explain. There are a couple of hundred people in this room. You've listened patiently, thank you for that, to our pearls of wisdom. Some of them may even have been recognized. Some of them may even have been acknowledged. Many of them may not. It doesn't matter. You will take those, you will think about them, you may even discuss them with other people. The ideas that you will have heard about over this weekend will spread across the planet. There are people here from America, from Australia, from Europe. The ideas will spread. Others will hear about it. In a few months' time, a couple of thousand people may be aware of some of these ideas. In a couple of years' time, maybe 10 times that number. And if enough people acknowledge that things should change, and they hear an idea that they can agree upon, that change occurs. Because that's the way humans work. Once we know that we can agree and we are supported in our belief, things change almost magically, almost overnight, almost without anybody assuming it. It just sort of happens. And this room starts that process. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.
I think I'd like to just carry on from what Marcus has said, and it reminds me of the most amazing day in the Avebury landscape. I was studying for my PhD. I was walking the fields, picking up flints, but before I'd started, it was a warm day. The sky was absolutely blue, and I was completely on my own. And out of the sky came the words, "In the commonality of our humanity, we're all ordinary. In the commonality of our divinity, we're all extraordinary." And I just invite you to remember that.
There are two ways to live. One way is by doing what we do now, because we did it yesterday, the day before, last year. Just carry on doing what we're doing, because that's a pretty safe option. We can just keep repeating ourselves. There is another way. Look at the world through your eyes as though you were looking through the eyes of a young child. It really is that simple.
Oh, we dance to the sun to find a world of harmony and balance. And we dance to the moon to find this world of harmony and balance. And we dance to the earth to find our connection and harmony and balance. And when we do so, our dance is also for you, that you find the place of harmony and balance within your world too. So this is our dream. Aho, or stay.